On a Thursday night in Hollywood, Florida. Tonight we are not only going to be learning from the Zera Shimshon, we're also going to have an insight from a very, very special sage who tonight is his 6th year of anniversary of passing. And this is the famed Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, the Rishon LeZion, the chief Sephardic rabbi of the state of Israel 3-4 times ago, because they only serve for 10 years at a time. However, tonight is the 6th year of his passing, and it's a tremendous merit for us to learn not only Torah in his merit, but also some teachings of his Torah in his merit. So may Hashem bless us to draw special spiritual powers from the rabbi and hopefully take it into our lives and our children and to everyone, along with the great merit of the Zera Shimshon that we have the great merit to learn. Again, those of us who, what? Amen. Very good. Those of us who would like to purchase and follow along, either to prepare part of the classes or to review part of the classes, we are learning from this English edition this year. This will be a little bit of a road map for you to follow along. I do add a lot to it. I go to the Hebrew to infuse it with its authentic teachings, but they did a good job. Last week I said I didn't know. This week I could say they did a good job, at least on the Parashat Noach, and we're going to, B'ezrat Hashem, be learning from this. So I sent the link out. If anyone would like to know how to order it, you can ask me as well. Okay. The very last verse of last week's Torah portion, if anyone would like to follow, we are in page 28. Small number, right? Page 28 in the Art Scroll Chumash. The very last verse of last week's Torah portion is a verse which some have the tradition to say, specifically some Sephardic families have the tradition to say, by the Havdalah. And this is the verse of V'Noach matzachen be'enei Adonai. And Noah found favor in the eyes of God. All right? Noah was the one who found favor. Move to the next before we ask some questions on this. The next verse, the first verse of this week's Torah portion, can be found on page 30. It says, Ele toledot Noach. These are the offsprings of Noach. And Noach was ish, tzadik, tamim, haya, bedorotav, et ha'elokim yitalech Noach. Noach was a righteous, a complete man in his generation, and Hashem walked along with Noah, meaning he was very close to Noah. Zera Shimshon asks two questions on these two verses. Firstly, he says, who was saved from the tremendous flood that destroyed the world? It was not only Noah, as the verse says, Noah found favor in God's eyes. It was more than that. It was Noah, it was his wife, his 3 children, their wives. They were saved in the ark. And then we know the Midrash tells us, Og Melech HaBashan, the great giant, he hung on the back of the ark, and he survived as well. But he was obviously not deserving of it. So let's speak about the 8 that made it into the ark. Why does the Zera Shimshon says so? Then why does the Torah say Noah found favor in God's eyes? This verse should have said Noah and his family found favor in God's eyes, or Noah and his children found favor in God's eyes. That's question number 1. Second question is this verse of the first verse of this week's Torah portion of Ele Toledot Noach seems to be everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. It first says these are the offsprings of Noah, and it doesn't tell us who his children are until the next verse. The next verse says Vayoled Noach shelosha banim. Noah had 3 children, Shem, Cham, and Yefet. So I'm going to tell you his offsprings. We're not even telling you who his children are. We're going to wait a little later. Wait, it tells us worse. These are the offsprings of Noah, and then it just says about Noah. Noah was a righteous man. Noah walked in the path of God. So Zera Shimshon wants to know what exactly is going on with this, as we say in Arabic, mishkababble. It's not Arabic, okay? Listen to 2 fascinating answers the Zera Shimshon gives. They are completely different, and they have 2 completely different messages for us as parents. The first answer that the Zera Shimshon gives, I'm going to preempt by telling us something very interesting about the generation or the generations of pre the flood. The flood was in the year 1656, just so we remember. 1656, that's from the birth of Adam. Remember last week we spoke about billions and billions of years for the first 6 days of creation? This is from Adam. It was 1656. Those 10 generations from Adam to Noah had something very particular about them. They did not live like we do, for the example of till 80, 90, 100, 120. If we look at some of the numbers, they're ranging on the low end 365, but that was an anomaly. The rest of them are 800, 900s. They're really, really up there. Okay? That's the first thing we need to understand. Why did that happen? And another interesting fact is that pre the flood, human beings did not eat meat. They did not eat fowl. They did not eat fish. They only ate whatever grew from the ground. What changed afterwards? Why is it that the human being was shrunk to the capacities, as we said, 80, 90, 100, 120 at the maximum? And why is it that after the flood, they started to eat, and they were not only started to, God told them, go and eat from the animals as well. Right. Okay? They seem to be very similar, but they're two separate topics, but I'm just bringing them as a parallel to, this is before the flood, and then after the flood, it was very different. So, before we answer that, there is a concept that we take true even today, that even though a boy and a girl become bar and bat mitzvah at either 12 years old for girls, 13 years old for boys, there is a concept of a bar onshin, as the Talmud refers to it, is one who is now liable for the very, very severe sins. Not the little things like taking stuff that's not yours or things which aren't as severe as those that are considered to be karet. We've spoken about karet. Karet is when someone does something so severe that the Torah says that their soul now is separated from the rest of the souls of Israel and from the source of God as well. That can only happen when a person finishes a complete 20 years of their life and they're now 21 years old. Okay? If we go back to the time of Noah, if we would give a person who lives on average 900 years only 20 years of that leeway, it's kind of not in proportion. So guess what? And Rashi tells it to us in this week's Torah portion, and it's all over, that they had up till 100 years old until they were truly liable for their misdeeds. Okay? Makes a little sense, right? 20 is to 120, as 100 is to 950. Maybe not exactly, but it's at least a closer ratio. Having said that, after God sees how corrupt the human people are after these first 10 generations, He says, and the Torah says it straight out, you know what's going to be? The lifespan of a human being is going to be closer to a 120. And it didn't happen overnight. It gradually got there. Even our patriarchs all lived over 120. Abraham at 175, Isaac at 180, Jacob at 147, and then already Jacob's kids and moving down, that's where it was under 120 and around 120. Moses hitting 120, which was a tremendous accomplishment. However, God said, I'm not going to allow the human race to live that long. You know why? Because it's too much time to make too many mistakes. This is a tremendous lesson you can learn for yourself, teach your children, teach your grandchildren, that as long as a person is busy, they stay out of trouble. If you have too much time, you find yourself getting into trouble and into a mess. So God wanted to mediate that and make sure that that does not happen, so He shortened it. Listen to it when it comes to the meat. When the rain started coming down, it started coming down first slow and then very heavy, the Midrash tells us that it wasn't just the human beings and the animals and the vegetation which got affected by the rain. Also, the first 3 tefachim, 3 hand breadths, around something like this, of the land got also damaged and destroyed, meaning that the vegetation after the flood to come out was not as strong and nutritious and as powerful as it was before. The human body was able to find all the nutrition it needed for hundreds and hundreds of years just in fruits and vegetables and grains. However, after the flood did tamper with and did now cause the earth to be giving the fruit and the vegetables and the grain in a compromised manner, the human being, the human body, did need some more nutrition, does, till today, still need more nutrition, and that's why there are different proteins and different things that we find, whether it's in eggs or fish or fowl or meat, that the human body needs to sustain. And that's why God comes to Noah and says, now you are able to eat meat. These are some changes. Based on all these changes, amongst others, the Zera Shimshon says, and he quotes Rashi on this week's Torah portion, and it's actually clear out the verse, that how old was Noah when he gave birth to his first son? So you might say 25, 125, 225, 500 years old. He was 500 years old, and he had to bend over and get down there and change their diapers and do all the stuff we do or did, right? At 500. But now Rashi's bothered with, hey, Noah's a great guy, right? The Torah says he's righteous, he's whole, complete with God. All the other people, the previous generations, they didn't have kids at 500. Their kids were much younger. They were in their hundreds and their 200s. You know, it's a little better, more agile. But Noah 500? What's the reason? So, listen to what God said. God said, Noah, I want to make sure that your children are all under 100 years old for the time of the flood. The flood happened when Noah was 600 years old. If he had his first son when he was 500, all of his three boys were under 100. They were 97, 98, and 99, and they were considered, this is the great chidush, the great novelty, as minors. Again, it's everything into realm. It makes sense. If I tell you that you're going to live to 900, so at 100 years old, it's still a baby. So God wanted them to be all minors, for what the Zera Shimshon is going to explain right now. And that's why Rashi says that God made Noah infertile until he was 500 years old. All for a reason. Comes now the Zera Shimshon and says, you know whose merit it was that Noah's children were saved? It was Noah's merit. It was not the children. Why? Because the children were not considered righteous and they were not considered evil. Because they were minors. They were not punishable. It didn't matter were they in the right direction or in the wrong direction. They were considered to be children still. Under 100 years old, still not liable for severe punishments. In this case, such as destruction, capital punishment. So Hashem wanted to make sure they were young. The Zera Shimshon says, we see from this that it was in Noah's merit, and that's what the Torah says, V'Noach matza chen b'nei Hashem. It was Noah who found favor, Noah alone who found favor in God's eyes, and that's why his whole family was saved. We'll get into this lesson in a moment, but that's his first answer. Second answer, he says, no, different. It was really Noah's children in their own merit were they saved. So again, the first answer, no, only Noah's merit. Second answer, you know what? Noah's children were also righteous enough to be considered to give in themselves their own merit to be saved. But they were under 100 years old, says the Zera Shimshon. What do you do with that? So he quotes the Talmud. I'm going to quote it to you. This is the Talmud in Tractate Brachot, page 48. And I'll quote to you the line here, translated in English. One can tell a well-rooted sapling from the beginning stages of its growth. It sounds poetic, right? And I'll give it to you in layman terms. You have a certain child. You have a certain grandchild. You give them a hockey stick and they find a puck lying around. They pick it up and they start slap-shotting and they start deking out and doing all the cool moves. Automatically. They kid's going to be sportive. He picks up the ball at the free throw line. The kid's a couple feet tall and whoop, swishes it in. You know what direction they're going. Okay, they're athletic. They're prone to that. You have other kids, you come into their house, all their siblings are running around and beating each other with Lego and whatnot, and you got one kid sitting in the corner and reading books. Oh, so we see where that sapling is headed. And I could give example after example after example, but this is a true concept. The Zera Shimshon says, Noah's children, they were all minors. Yes, again, under 100 considered to be a minor. But they were already going in the right direction. They were going in the right direction, and therefore they were saved in their own merit. Okay? So now we can ask on both of these answers, well, what about the other children? The first answer, that it was only in Noah's merit that they were saved, but they were little children, and that's why they couldn't be punished. What about other little children, meaning little children, all the other people under 100 years old? Why were they punished? Why did they perish? Because they didn't have a parent to give them the merit. It wasn't in the merit of their parents. Their parents were all evil. So now hear this answer. The Zera Shimshon says that these kids were doing the right thing because they were following in the footsteps of their father. And this is something the other children did not have. The Zera Shimshon takes a little pause and he gives us one of the most fascinating lessons in child rearing, which we've spoken about, but it's nice to see that Zera Shimshon also says it black on white. The greatest way to teach a child, the greatest way to teach anybody anything, is leading by example. Sitting down and preaching, sitting down and giving a lesson, as I say, may be a part of parenting, which we might have to do, but our kids don't learn that much from those lectures and those type of punishments. No. You know how they really follow in the right direction? It's when we do certain things, then they follow in the same way. How can, lo aleinu, a person who doesn't conduct honest business, and it's like something that everyone knows already, how can he come over to his children and tell the children, don't take what's not yours, speak nicely to one another? They're not doing it themselves. How can a parent come and demand from their children to not use foul language, to speak nicely, not raise their voice, if the children see their parents speaking to others and unfortunately maybe even to themselves, using swear words, raising their voice, speaking in a not way? How can you come over to your children and say, don't speak lashon hara, don't speak negatively, slander about someone else, and they're speaking themselves about it? It's hypocritical. The children cannot tolerate it. And the Zera Shimshon tells us, do you know why Noah's children, those saplings, looked like they were going in a good direction? It's because they saw what their father was doing. They saw and they continued in the same path as their father. With this, the Zera Shimshon answers two different interpretations Rashi gives on our very first verse. This is the first Rashi in this week's Torah portion, and I'm going to read it. The verse says, Ele toledot Noach, these are the offsprings of Noah, and Noah was a righteous man. Rashi says, Hoyil v'hiskiro sefer bishvacho, since the verse, the Torah now, is telling us about his greatness, shene'emar zecher tzadik livracha, it's telling us about the great stuff of the great things that Noah did, or the great merit Noah was able to provide. The Zera Shimshon says that's the first answer. The first answer was Noah's children had no merit. It was only in Noah's merit that they were saved, because they were minors. Second answer, now Rashi says, to tell us that the ikar toldotehem shel tzadikim, the great and the authentic offsprings of a righteous person, is ma'asim tovim, their good deeds. So on surface level, you can say, well, what's the only thing a person can take with them? Their good deeds. When all of us are going to reach 120, we're going to face our Creator. What's He going to look at us and judge us on? On our deeds. On our good deeds we'll get reward, and the opposite as well. The Zera Shimshon wants to give a better interpretation. He says, you know what the great offspring of a righteous person is? Their good deeds, which transfer on by leading through a good example to have their offsprings, their real children, follow in those ways. And these were the two different answers of why the Torah only says it was in Noah's merit. Either it was really only Noah's merit, or the children had the merit too, but again, it was the cause of Noah leading them in a good direction and giving them a good example for his children to be considered righteous as well. Anyone who does have this, at the end of every Dvar Torah of this book, there's a little gray box with like a two-liner of a recap of the lesson from the answer that is given. So listen, he gives both for both. He says, number one, and we'll read it, it's very nice. The merit of a righteous individual protects his children. That's the first answer. Now the second answer, children grow to become righteous people by seeing a live example of righteousness in their parents. And these are two very, very strong lessons. It's important from a young age to make sure to give that good example. It's hard, but as I've said more than once, one's spouse and one's children are the greatest keys to keeping a person in check, in line. Because when you live alone, no one knows. You don't have an accounting with anybody, so to say. Or you do only for work hours. Or you do when you're in public. But when you're married, and even more when you have kids, because sometimes you find a way to get away from your wife or your husband for a moment, right? To breathe sometimes. But you don't have that luxury with the children. It's with the children, along with one spouse, that a person is always on video camera, always being watched, always being learned from. And therefore we have to take that great responsibility and be that good example so our children will follow in those good ways. That's the first dvar for this parasha. Moving on to the next. The Midrash recounts that Noah built the ark for no less than 120 years. It's a lifetime for us, right? It's like there's an extra zeros for this whole to-do. Okay, good. 120 years. Why would God do such a thing? The Midrash says for a specific reason. Because God wanted to expose what he was about to do to punish the world and give them some hope, give them a chance to come back, to do teshuvah, to return, to repent. So listen to what the Midrash says happened. The 120 years, how long does it take to build a boat? It might take me 120 years. But for a handy guy, not 120 years. Listen to what happened. God told him, I want you to start fresh. Take seeds of a cedar tree. Go plant it in the ground. Water it. Let it grow. Chop them down. Form boards. With those boards, make the ark. So when the people of the land would see, Noah was a prominent individual. He was known to not be engaged in any of the wrong activity. We're going to speak about what it was. That's the next dvar. But he was not engaged in any of the corruption or the transgressions that the rest of the world was. He had a certain stature. He was in the league of his own. So everyone knows that it was very weird because everyone knows, Noah the righteous, he's changing his field. He was a scholar or a simple salesman. That's it. He's going into the planting industry for a couple decades. Okay, after that, he's going into the harvesting or the wood chopping. Started chopping everything up. Okay, Noah's opening his own Home Depot. It's nothing's for sale. He's making his own boards and he's storing them. And then he's becoming a carpenter and he's building. Okay. This was all to, again, prompt the people to inquire, what are you doing? So when they did, look what they did. They come to Noah and they ask Noah, hey, Looney Tune, what are you doing? Oh, God has seen how evil you have become, and he is going to destroy the world. He told me to build an ark, save my family, myself and my family in the ark. So listen to the Midrash. All this, as much as this makes sense, is able for us to swallow. But now listen to the next part. You know how they answer? They answer him, "You fool, Noah! If God is going to send some type of punishment, whether it be by flood or any other, he's going to come and destroy you. He's going to send it to you and not to anyone else." This is what the Midrash tells us. The Zera Shimshon says, I'm sorry, this doesn't make any sense. Everyone knew that Noah was righteous, and they knew that they were wrong. Okay, whether they knew they were wrong, but as much as they justified it, but at the end of the day, they were killing people, they were taking things they were not theirs, they were committing adultery, they were doing really, really wrong things. How could they say that the pious person is going to be the one that's going to be punished, and they are not? Comes the Zera Shimshon and answers from the Zohar. The Zohar HaKadosh tells us that Noah was at fault because he did not pray for the sake of his generation. He did not pray for them to repent. He did not pray to God to forgive them. Now, again, let's not belittle Noah in any way. He was a prophet. God was speaking to him. By show of hands, how many people has God spoken to? None of us. So let's not downplay Noah in any way at all. He was a prophet. He was a righteous man. However, being on that level, just like Moshe Rabbeinu was also judged on a higher level, the higher level a person, the more stringently they are judged. Noah has not prayed for the people of his generation, not even once. We're talking 120 years. So not only were the 120 years for the rest of the world, it was for Noah to wake up and open his mouth also to God. Nada. Absolutely nothing. To the point where this week's Haftarah we're going to read, the Navi, the prophets, refer to the whole flood as the flood of Noah, the waters of Noah. Personally, I think that's the worst name for it, the most inaccurate name. How are you going to name? I would name it as the waters of the world, the waters of corruption, the waters of destruction. No, you know what our prophets say you're going to name this flood? The flood of Noah, the waters of Noah. That's not fair. He's the only righteous guy. He's the only guy that survived. Aha. The reason why is because he did not pray for anyone else. If he would have prayed for them, if he would have opened his mouth to speak to God on their behalf, God, maybe something would have happened. At least he would have done his part. And that's all we can do. Noah didn't in that aspect. The Zera Shimshon gives a couple examples. He says, by the whole story of Purim, Mordechai tells Esther, when Esther has almost given up hope, Mordechai didn't. She's in the palace. And Mordechai sends Esther a message. Now is not a time to be silent. Now is a time to pray for the Jewish people. And so when she did, she came and she decreed 3 days of fast and prayer, and then everything turned around. There's another lesson the Talmud tells us, that if chas v'shalom, God forbid, there is a communal trouble or problem, issue, plague, something, turbulence in the community, if let's say you're not affected from it, you can't go home and say, life is good, at least I'm not affected by this. God forbid. Because then what you're doing is you're separating yourself from everyone else. And when you do that, the problem is, right now they're suffering and you're not. But as we know, life is a roller coaster. And when everyone else is going to be rising up, you won't be part of that rise anymore. You're not allowed to disassociate yourself from the community. You need to pray for the well-being of the community and be there and do whatever you can even when they're struggling or when it's hard. There's another example the Zera Shimshon gives. There's a concept of an inadvertent murderer. What that means is someone who kills someone else by mistake. It could be a car accident. They didn't have cars back then. It could be a donkey accident. It could be you're painting or you're building something and then your tool falls and hits a unlucky individual walking by. Your ladder falls. Something happens that clearly by mistake, it was clearly by mistake, but you did kill somebody. The Torah says very clearly what happens to that person. He goes to a refugee city operated by the Levites. And until the Kohen Gadol passes away, the high priest, he would be living there, stuck there. You know what the Talmud says why there would be so many, or even any at all, inadvertent killers in the land of Israel? It's because on Yom Kippur, the only day of the year that the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, enters into the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, he didn't pray hard enough for the Jewish people. Again, being judged on a very high level. But we see again a concept of people, especially great people, having an obligation to pray for others. Look at Abraham. Yep. Abraham was the prime example, the bipolar opposite of Noah. He got out there. He was bringing people in. We're going to read very soon, Sodom, the city of Sodom, was a worst place. It was somewhat, in some degrees, a re-episode of this generation, the generation before the flood. And Abraham goes and he prays to God, find 50, can't find 50, 40, 30, at least 10, nothing, 1, nobody. Okay, go pick up your nephew and yalla. But at least he tried. It wasn't called the destruction of Abraham. It wasn't called the flames of Abraham when Sodom came down. No, it was the destruction of Sodom because Abraham did his part. That's all we have to know we have to do. So this is what they were telling Noah. Noah, you think if God's going to send a flood, he's going to come and get us? It's going to come and get you because you didn't do anything to make it better. You didn't do anything to pray. You didn't do anything to bring us closer. And that's the problem. So what was Noah's defense? He's so bad. And what can we find as a defense for Noah not praying for the world that he was living in? The Zera Shimshon, what?
Busy.
Busy building. Okay. But the whole point of that was to bring them back. So, the Zera Shimshon quotes a Midrash. The Midrash says that God has tolerance in his upper realm of every sin. He understands the human condition. He understands that human beings have an evil inclination, sometimes make the right decisions, the wrong decisions, but there's one thing God cannot tolerate. He can't even hold back from punishing. And that is the transgression of immorality. Anything that has to do with immorality, specifically sexual immorality, God cannot tolerate. It just, again, kivyachol, as if eats him alive. He just cannot stand it. It's just so repulsive and disgusting to God that he cannot stand it. He needs to punish. The Zera Shimshon says, what's the point of prayer? The point of prayer is to appeal to God's mercy and ask him to give in, ask him to be tolerant. Noach is thinking, how can I ask God to be tolerant on something that God is not tolerant on about anyways? And that was his rationale to his defense. We'll say something we'll take a pause because there's more in the Zera Shimshon, but we'll say something in the name of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Again, tonight is his 6th anniversary of passing. He was born in 1920 and he passed away in 2013. The leading Torah scholar, advisor, head on the shoulders, man on the grounds. There was nobody that our generation saw that comes close to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef in multiple realms. And he revolutionized the concept of Torah study, especially for Sephardic Jewry. He brought back the concept of learning halakha, Jewish law, in a very strong way. And he, as we'll soon see, he dedicated, I could say all of, but at least most, if not all of his life, to the Jewish people. And he draws now a difference over here of analyzing Noah's personality. The Talmud says that Noah was righteous only in his generation. That was one opinion. And another opinion is, no, even if he would have been in another generation, he would have been righteous. As the Torah says, Ish tzaddik tamim haya bedorotav, in his generation, in his time. Is that inclusive or exclusive? Is it including if he would have been in another generation also he would have been righteous? Or, no, he's only righteous because he's amongst bad people, corrupt people. Okay, it's like being what's the saying? The tail of the fox, or no, the tail of the lions, or the head of the foxes. Yeah, that's the line? Okay, so that's, what? Yeah, either the tail of the lion or the head of the foxes. This is the debate. Was Noah really righteous only in his generation, or even if you would have put next to Abraham or next to Moses? So, there's two opinions. He's going along. Rabbi Ovadia is now analyzing the opinion of, no, he would have not been compared to being righteous in another generation. And he draws here a parallel between Abraham and Noah. And look at the grand difference. Noah spending all his time building and building and building and just telling people their message, the message God told him. You know what Abraham did? Abraham found God, unlike Noah, who God found him. And Abraham set up a tent. He set up a tent, and he would have it open on all corners, and he would invite every single person in. And it wasn't just a simple meal. It was like you go to the greatest restaurant, you go to the greatest hotel, and they bring you, the way he brings it, says it over here, whether this is really how it was or not, at least it's just to dramatize it, but they would bring you a menu. What would you like? Dun, 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 dun. They'd bring it all to you. Okay, can I pay for my meal? Nope. It's on the house. On the house? What does that mean, it's on the house? Sure. You just need to come to a half-hour class by Abraham. And if you're a woman, you're going to go to a special women's class by Zera. And everything's good. Meals paid for. Really? This is an expensive bill? No. And you know what? There's even dessert at the class. Come along. It's a little more than this, but you come, and that's all it is. That's what they did. They brought people in by food. They brought people in by giving them shelter, by giving them shade, by giving them water. They set themselves up not, can you imagine, you have people who want to support or to invest in you, to do chesed and do good things to people. What are you going to do? You're going to go find a little corner. No one's going to come to me, so you could keep everything for yourself. No. You know where he was? He was on the busy road. He was on the I-95. He was there on the interstate road, getting the most amount of travelers and bringing them in. Noah came into the ark with him, his wife, 3 kids, and their wives, 8 people. Abraham brought thousands and thousands of people under the wings of the Almighty. We're going to read about this. Abraham and Sarah, we know, did not have children until they were way older. Abraham being 100 till Isaac was born, Sarah being 90 when Isaac was born. Yet the Torah still says that they came, Im kol hanefesh asher asu b'charan. They come to Canaan, the land of Israel, with so many, all of the souls that they made in Haran. You would think that that'd be their children. Nope. Rather, their students were like their children. They helped them find their souls and find their connection. This is a grand difference between the two. Even when we see how God relates to his relationship between Abraham and Noah, it's different. And he gives the anecdote. He says a man, a father has 2 sons. Okay? One of them is a goody-good, and one of them, as we say in Hebrew, is a little shovav. He's a little rebellious, excited child. Okay? The good, well-mannered child, you let him walk in front of you. But the little bandito, you grab him and you keep him close to you so he doesn't run into the street, or he doesn't break something or take something. Yeah, we all have those type. Yeah, 1 and 1. Okay. He says, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef says, this is the difference between Abraham and Noah. When it comes to Noah, it says, Et ha'elokim hithalech Noach. Meaning, God grabbed him and God is the one who leaded him. He was the little bandito. But when it comes to Abraham, listen to what it says. No. 1 second. Right over here. So it's, and then when it says to Abraham, it says, Hithalech lefanai v'yeh tamim. By Abraham, it says, go in front of me and be whole and complete. Exactly like those two children. Abraham was the well-mannered one, the well-behaved, the one who knew, and Noah was not, unfortunately. And the grand lesson Rabbi Ovadia Yosef teaches us, along with not only teaching us by writing it and saying it, but what he did live by example was, if you are able to do something to bring someone else closer to God, if you're able to do something to inspire somebody, to teach them Aleph Bet, to teach them Hebrew, to teach them a piece of wisdom that you learned, to give them some hope, don't be like Noah and just go back to your building. Because you could build for 120 years, and so what do? You built for yourself. But if you acknowledge others, you help others, you do for others, you take the God-given talents that you have and use them for the betterment of mankind. When we realize that Kol Yisrael Arivim Zilazeh, each and every Jew is a guarantor for one another. We're all one. We're all one spiritually, we're all one physically, we're one big family. And therefore it's incumbent upon us to learn from this mistake of Noah of not keeping to yourself. We can't go home, just put our legs up on the couch and say everything's fine. No, the world's in chaos. The Jewish people are in chaos. The amount of, God forbid, intermarriage that there is, the amount of suffering, the amount of needy people, the amount of teenagers and even higher that have major drug and alcohol addictions. These are things we cannot just overlook and say, I don't like alcohol, what do I care? I never took any drugs, so what do I care? No! We gotta get out there and we gotta help. We gotta bring them back. That was Abraham. Do you want to be an Abraham personality? Or do you want to be a Noah personality? This is the grand difference that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef tells us that we can learn from this week's Parashat. It ties in very nicely with what the Zera Shimshon is teaching us this week. So let's read the little blurb before we go on to the third and final Dvar Torah for this week. When a person has the ability to help others be spared of suffering, in brackets, even if they may rightfully deserve it, close brackets, he may be blamed for their suffering and possibly even his own suffering. And this is exactly what happened to Noah. We're now going to learn the next piece, and this is a grand confusion that anyone who opens the text of this week's Torah portion can find very easily. If you allow me, go to page 30, and the Torah now is discussing the reason why God had to reset the world and destroy it. It starts off by saying, I'm in verse 11, Vatishachet haaretz lifnei haelokim, that now the earth has become corrupt before God. Okay? Then it continues, Vatimale haaretz chamas, and the earth has become filled with robbery. So, as the commentaries explain, the first part of the verse is talking to us about adultery. That the world has now become corrupt before God, that's in realms of adultery. But the end of the verse says, no, it has to do with robbery. Okay, so what was the problem? Why did God decide that the world had to be destroyed and reset? Is it adultery or is it robbery? Next verse. Vayar Elokim et haaretz. Now God looks down at the land, ve'ineh nishchata, and it is corrupt. Now that's referring back to adultery. Ki ishchit kol basar al kol haaretz, because every living being has corrupted themselves on the land, which means to say that not only were human beings committing adultery and immorality, even the animals were. Unfortunately, it's disgusting to even say this concept. There was bestiality taking place. Human beings with animals. Different species of animals with different species. Something which, thank God, nowadays for the most part is unheard of. But the whole world was corrupt. Everyone was going cuckoo. God said, I gotta stop this. So, but again, listen to the issue over here. It first starts off by saying the reason is because of immorality. Then it goes on and says it's because of theft. Next part, it's immorality. Now it's going to bounce back and forth again. Verse 13. Vayomer Elokim leNoach. God says to Noah, Ketz kol basar ba lefanai. The end of all living creatures have come before me. That's it. Ki malea haaretz chamas mipenehem. Because now the land is full of chamas. I'm going to explain what Hamas means in a moment, but on a simple level, theft, stealing, robbery. And then it bounces back one more time, and now I'm going to wipe out, again, terminology of hashchata, which is corruption. I'm going to wipe out all the corruption. So basically, there's 5 times it's going back and forth. It's immorality, theft, immorality, theft, and then immorality. It goes back and forth within 3 verses, so now the Zera Shimshon wants to know, what's the reason? Why did the world become destroyed? Is it both? So say it's both. Don't jump in back and forth. Just tell us very clearly that it is both. He continues further to say that there's different sources that our commentaries and different Jewish sources tell us one way and the other. He says over here that the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud says that God sends massive punishments to the masses only because of immorality. Meaning, when a multitude of people are committing immorality, adultery, God will send His wrath and send His punishment and will punish not only those at fault, but even innocent people at the same time because it angers God so much. So that would seem like, okay, so a portion of the world was committing adultery and immorality. That's why the whole world had to go down. However, the Midrash says, you know what the reason for the seal of the deal that the world had to be reset and destroyed was because of their theft, because they were robbing from one another. So whether it's the verses, whether it's our Talmudic or Midrashic, our rabbinic writings, it all seems to leave us with a confusion of what's the reason, adultery or theft. Before I get into that, I want to explain to you what Hamas means. Hamas means the following, and you might have heard this if you were by my last year's Noah class, or maybe even a couple years ago. I always mention this because it's an idea that many don't know. If I would come up to you and I would say, Benny, nice phone you got over there. Oh yeah, Rabbi, it's an iPhone X. Da, 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 da. Okay. Great! By the way, he doesn't speak like that, don't worry. Okay, Benny, here's a $20 bill. Sell me your phone. Rabbi, this phone's over $1,000. What are you talking about? Benny, I'm buying it for you, from you. Here's the $20. And you say, no, Rabbi, come on, I love you, but no. And then, I'm saying it's me, but thank God, hopefully it would not be me. I would take out a gun, and I'd point it at him and say, Benny, I'm buying the phone off you for $20. You give me your phone. You give me the phone, you take the $20, and it's over. So what am I rationalizing? I'm rationalizing, I didn't steal it. I paid for the goods. And he's feeling, I got ripped off big time. I got stolen from. And the same could be used for anything. For a car, for property, whatever it is. Some people call this mafia. Other people just call it extortion. It's corruption in another word as well. That is Hamas. Hamas is when the victim really feels like they're being stolen from, and the villain is justifying what they are doing by giving something in return, which is ridiculous, as we know. This is one of the grand things that they were doing in the time of the generation of the flood. They were stealing from each other, but they were doing it in a way that they were justifying, like, it's not that bad. Having said that, what was the cause? Was it their theft, or was it their adultery? The Zera Shimshon quotes to us a conversation God has with Moses after the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the golden calf was, as we know, a smack in the face from the Jewish people back to God. It was, we've spoken about it, it was a horrible, 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 horrible act. Now, what's Moses' job? Again, unlike Noah, he came to the forefront. He came to bat for the Jewish people. He came to try to get God to forgive them. So listen to what he says. He says, God, you can't punish them for this. God says, really, why not? Listen to the following. You made it a point that they leave Egypt with a lot of riches, with a lot of gold. Why? Because you promised Abraham, their forefather, that they would go into exile to a land of slavery, but they would come back with riches, with gold, with jewels. Furthermore, when they left the splitting of the sea, and all of the bodies of the Egyptians were washed up to shore to prove that they died and they weren't coming on the other side, they came up with all their gold. Because that was the tradition back in the day. You go to war, you bring everything you own with you. Because it's either being taken or you're taking more. This was the way of war back in the day. So they got so much jewels in Egypt. They got so much more gold and stuff at the sea. They come now, they're waiting for you 40 days, they miscalculated by a couple hours. What do you want them to do? They got all this gold, they got them into trouble. Moshe uses a kind of vulgar anecdote, and the only reason why I'm going to use it is because he used it and it's recounted in the Talmud. Don't quote me on it, okay? Moses tells God it's like the following. This is, if you're going to remember one thing, I hope you remember more than just this, but you're going to remember this, I can guarantee you, okay? Moses says it's like parents, a father and a mother, that take he doesn't give an age, but I'll just give an age, their 16-year-old boy. They take him home, they bathe him, they groom him, they dress him, perfume him up, smelling good, and they put a sack of gold coins around his neck, hanging. They take this boy and they bring him to the doorway of the prostitutes. What do you think is going to happen with that kid? Is the kid going to sin or not? Oh, he looks good, he smells good, he's dressed well, and he's got plenty of gold. That is what Moses said God, you did to the Jewish people. You set them up for failure by giving them up so much gold. When they're bored and they're stuck and they're waiting and they're confused, what are they going to do with it all? God said, okay, you're right. I'll take that from you. Is that genius? The Zera Shimshon applies the same concept to the generation of the flood. The generation of the flood was blessed with a tremendous amount of abundance. This was God's first test of humanity, if you want to call it. He gave them long lives. They didn't need a hunt. They were able to eat whatever grew around. They got everything they needed. They were very wealthy. They had plenty of real estate, right? There were less people than there are today. They had everything they needed, but they were very, very wealthy. Now, what happens to someone who is very, very comfortable, didn't ever have to work too hard in their life, to get themselves into trouble? It's a fact of life. Like we said, if you're not busy with something productive, you'll be busy with trouble, with bad things. And that's always a balance that parents always have to try to set their children up for success while growing up, regardless of their means, whether it's a lot or a little. Making them work hard enough, but not too hard to break them, and not give them too much that it sets them up for failure, but give them enough to survive. It's one of the hard tests of child rearing nowadays. But they were, the Zera Shimshon says, living in abundance. They were living, as the Midrash says, in a state of me'en olam haba, so much abundance, almost as if it was like a taste of the world to come. That's how much abundance they had. Okay, granted, they have so much abundance, they're so wealthy, so much gold, so much everything. Okay, so we might be able to rationalize and say that's why they were committing adultery. That's why there was immorality in that realm. But the Zera Shimshon says, what about the other sin? The sin of stealing and robbery. They have so much. You need more? You have so much to live off of for yourself and for 10 generations. And what, you're going to go and steal $3,000? A couple sheep from your neighbor? What do you need it for? You got so much. The Zera Shimshon says that second sin was what sealed the deal. Because they did that second sin of stealing, they can no longer claim an onus on the first sin, the sin of immorality. They could have got off the hook and said, God, you set us up for failure with giving us so much. That's why we're sinning with immorality. But now they can't come over and say that anymore. Why? Because they were stealing. If you had so much, you wouldn't have to go steal from your neighbor. So that's how the Zera Shimshon answers the verses, and he answers the rabbinic sources. The main reason God had to destroy the world was immorality. But they had some way to kind of justify it. But you know what sealed the deal? The fact that they were stealing from one another. Because now that justification, that onus was thrown out the window. In life, we have to think about, when do we excuse ourselves? When do we justify our actions? When we do things which are definitely compromisable. When we do that, do we ever do anything that contradicts it? You know, you come and you say, this week I cannot keep Shabbat because X, Y, and Z. Okay. But next week, you don't have those same conditions. Are you going to keep Shabbat? Okay, this time I'm not keeping kosher because I'm traveling. It's life and death situation. Okay, what about when you're not in a life and death traveling situation? Are you keeping kosher or not? You could only claim an onus if when there's no onus, you're not subjugating yourself to that or giving into that same low standard. You can't say, today I have a headache, that's why I didn't come to the class, or I didn't come to the synagogue because I have a headache. Okay, so what about tomorrow? What about the next week, the next month? Oh, Rabbi, I have an ear, you know how many excuses? Rabbi, I'm tired. Rabbi, I have an ear infection. Rabbi, I have this. Rabbi, my kid. Okay, fine. Tell me when the excuses are over, and then if you really want to do something, you'll do it. Now, granted, there are sometimes real excuses. But how much excuses, how much justification? The only time we can get, so to say, excused for those justifications is when we have no justification and we do what we are supposed to do. This is a tremendous lesson we learn from this concept. Sometimes people say, you know, if I had, I would give. If I have time, I would help you with my time. If I had money, I would donate, I would give charity. Okay. What happens in a year from now, in a couple years from now, and you have the time, or you have the means, are you giving then? Well, the only way you excused yourself before is because you didn't have, and now that you have, are you going to do it or not? These are core, fundamental lessons of being true to oneself that we learn in this week's Torah portion. We're going to read the blurb, and with that we'll finish. The blurb says as follows, and this was well written. Watch this. Although a person sometimes thinks he has excuses to justify his actions, upon deeper reflection, he may learn that his reasoning is disproven by his very own actions. And to that, may Hashem bless us in the merit of the Zera Shimshon, in the merit of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, that tonight is his 6th Yartzeit, his 6th Hilulah, that Hashem will help us and guide us in the right path, guide us to be true to ourselves, true to our family and friends, true to our Creator, and flourish in the ultimate blessings of happiness, health and success, and all great things. Amen v'amen.
Amen.
If there are any questions, we'll take some questions. Yeah.